If I say Middle East, what do you think? Maybe you think about the magical world of Aladdin. Maybe you think about violence. Or maybe you think about the Iranian friends like the ones in Saws of Sunset. But these aren't the only representations, just the ones that are most visible to us. Not just this one or that one, we are flooded.
Social warning where you can see the whole civilization.
The most cynical interpretation is this is wag the dog right in front of our faces, right?
That's a lot of information about the Middle East that changes with how Westerners wanted to perceive them over time. So, here's a timeline. Welcome to the 1920s, where the Middle East was depicted as desert odysseys and romanticized for the sake of being what the West wasn't. During this time, there was a production code which regulated what could be shown on screen. Overly sexualized scenes were not allowed. But in shows about the Middle East, exotic portrayals flourished. In this scene, the Sheik sneaks into the mistress' room without permission and sneaks a glance at her as she sleeps. In another well-known show, Road to Morocco, we see the European who becomes a sheik and obtains a harem of women who service him.
And now you're here, so close to me.
In these movies, the Middle East was depicted as a place for people to project their inner desires in a foreign land.
Before the Middle East became a headline about war, oil, or terrorism, it was often treated as a Hollywood fantasy. But in the 1950s and 1960s, that image started to change. The Middle East was no longer just a desert backdrop for adventure, it became a political stage. Films like The Ten Commandments and Exodus helped American audiences connect the region to religion, land, conflict, and power. These stories were non-neutral. They often taught viewers who to sympathize with and who to fear. As U.S. identification with Israel grew, media created a good versus bad quote-unquote Middle Eastern figure. Israel and Western aligned power were framed as modern, moral, and deserving of protection, while Arabs were more often framed as threatening or backward. This connects to Orientalism because the Middle East was still being defined through a Western point of view. It also shows binary opposition, where the West and its allies appeared civilized and heroic, while Arabs are pushed into the role of the enemy. The 1967 Six-Day War made this image even stronger. During this period, ideas of the New World Order also framed the US as a benevolent power, bringing order and protection to a dangerous region. When these images were repeated in film, news, and popular culture, they became part of hegemony. They started to feel like common sense. So when people today hear Middle East and think of war, crisis, or danger, those ideas did not come from nowhere. They were built scene by scene and headline by headline. And in the 1970s, this image would become even harder to escape.
1973. Arab oil-producing nations launch an embargo against the United States. Their message? We will not stop and maintain the same rate of reduction until Israeli forces are withdrawn from Arab countries, and the Palestinian people are free. Their political demands were clear, but what Americans felt was something else. Oil prices quadrupled overnight. Gas stations ran dry. Lines stretched for blocks. Instead of sparking debate about Palestinian rights, the embargo sparked resentment. In American popular culture, Arabs became a caricature.
My speed is rivaled only by the lightning bolts from the heavens.
A greedy oil sheik, sabotaging American life. Then came 1979. Iranian revolutionaries seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, holding 66 Americans hostage for 444 days. It was a direct protest against President Carter's decision to grant asylum to the deposed Shah, accused of widespread human rights abuses back home. Something shifted in the news narrative. The Middle East was no longer just a geopolitical problem. it became a threat to the American family. This fear found its way into culture, with films like Not Without My Daughter crystallizing what would become a defining trope: the American held hostage in the Middle East.
I won't stay here. You can't.
Now you listen to me. You're in my country now. You're my wife. You do as I say.
These films reduced the political issue into action thrillers, propagating anti-Middle Eastern rhetoric. These stories focusing not on the struggle for Palestinian freedom, but on American families and lifestyles under siege. They depoliticized Middle Eastern politics and villainized them by forming a repertoire of images that victimize the U.S. and represent the Middle East as a place that wants to destroy U.S. freedom.
You understand me? This is a media war. A media war, you better get on board.
The 1990s saw the U.S. promote military multiculturalism, using volunteers and diversity to further define benevolent supremacy. The reason behind war? Because the U.S. was multicultural and democratic, it had a moral duty to aid or rather interfere with other sovereignties, when in actuality serving national interests. Arabs, however, were not a part of the larger narrative of multiculturalism, with their representations by default being chained to war and terrorism. The Gulf War made the Middle East once again must-see TV, commercializing conflict and reinforcing stereotypes, countering the bad Arab with the good. Journalism wasn't truthful, it was eye-catching. This media representation of the good-bad Arab dichotomy continued on till 9/11, the catalyst for the war on terror.
We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
They're trying to create a Sharia law, and so in order for that to happen, they need to destroy America and Israel, because they stand against that.
Under the guise of finding terrorists, the public perceived every Arab as Muslim, and therefore dangerous. Arab representation today is still vastly stereotyped, from Sheik to terrorist.
After covering an evolution of the Middle East from the perspective of America, let's see how current conceptions of the Middle East aggregate.
I think of tension or conflict.
Oil? Muslims?
War.
I would guess probably in like ethnic clothing or like some sort of head wrap that is like important to their culture.
Well, I kind of work with people with the Middle East. I think they're normal people, I think.
With the dissemination of information due to social media and the internet, a variety of opinions form, educated by different news sources, journalists, editors, etc.
That everyone is looking at. Does Islam promote violence?
Is at war with the West.
From this information, we can observe cultural hegemony, a term coined by Gramsci regarding the dominance of one group over another. In this scenario, the dominating U.S. perspective over the Middle Eastern perspective, which becomes what we associate with as the common sense in regards to the Middle East. We deconstruct these hegemonic ideas through producing counter-hegemonic identities, reframing power systems to give underrepresented groups a chance to define themselves separate from the power binary. Media is a prominent way to perpetuate counter-hegemonic ideas, and we are able to measure that with the Obeidi-Assultani test. The test is used to measure the representation of Muslim characters in media, and the show or movie must pass every point in order to be conducive to improving the depiction of Muslims in modern-day media. With the history of evolving depictions of the Middle East, information has become the most accessible it has ever been, transforming from Orientalism and an exotic placeholder to adapting a malicious role to complement U.S. interests in politics and oil. We can build an educated, holistic understanding of the people. So we ask you again, what is the Middle East?